Dianne Yarwood worked in accounting and corporate advisory in London and Sydney. She also nurtured a love for cooking and catering. At the age of 40, with 3 young children, she became very ill and her life was saved by an emergency doctor. This brush with mortality gave her the courage to do what she'd always wanted to do, write. Her first novel, The Wakes, was released in March this year, and it is absolutely wonderful. As soon as I'd finished it, I wish that I hadn't read it so I could read it all over again for the first time. So I'm so pleased to be talking to Dianne about The Wakes and her writing process. Hi, Dianne.
Hello, Sophie. Thanks so much for having me.
It's really lovely to have you here to talk about The Wakes. Can you tell us a bit about how the idea for the novel started? Obviously, you cooking and catering and emergency doctor experience might have had something to do with it, but maybe not.
Well, it sort of did, but that was an ancillary thing. It's actually my second novel. My first one is in a drawer on my bedside table. I'd heard about authors doing that and could not believe I was actually doing it, but I did that. It was a little bit of a mess. I was told it was 3 books in one, which is very me. And but it was also about death. When I sat down to write, it seemed to be the thing I needed to write about. So that was, it really wasn't a thought process. It was just what I sat down and that's what came out. And the book, The Wakes, sort of came organically from that first one. I refined what I wanted to say, but it was always what I wanted to say. And it really did stem from my own personal experience when I was 40, when I nearly died. This idea that, well, not an idea, and a fact for me, that death, coming close to dying, highlighted the preciousness of life for me. And it was a feeling I really wanted to express in novel form. It was something I wanted to share. It was something a very strong emotion for me. And it was the #1 thing I wanted to write about. So, yeah.
Do you feel like that novel in the drawer was therefore the apprenticeship to get to The Wakes?
Very much so. It was me teaching myself how to write a novel. I didn't do a course. I just thought, I know how I want to write. I know my style of writing. I know what I want to write about. So I thought, I'll just sit down and write a novel. But it's such an unwieldy thing. It's such a big thing. And I think that first novel was, me learning what not to do, really, and learning what I could do. It was a mixture of, there was a lot of me masquerading as fiction in it. I was one of the 3 stories, and my sister and my husband were the only ones to read that. And my sister knew it was true and she knew it wasn't true. And she said, when I started making things up, it took off. Okay. So for me, the truth was limiting. I felt compelled to stick with the truth. And so from a creative point of view, it was a little limiting, I think. So I learned that. So The Wakes is entirely fiction, but with the sort of truth of my experiences in terms of emotion and themes, is still there. So
So when you started to write The Wakes, was it with a sense of a clean slate that you thought, all right, I have this other manuscript, but I'm just going to put it out of my mind? Or was it tempting to think, maybe I can sneak back and take
no, I wasn't entirely clean. I sneaked something out. It was the funeral catering. I snuck that out because I knew how good that was as something to sort of explore. It was a way of me talking about death that allowed humor, that allowed it's quirky. It allows the characters to be at a funeral that aren't grieving, so they're seeing death in a different way, a sort of a commonplace, like a normal commonplace sort of way. I liked that angle, so that was the only thing. I snuck that out. Whole new story, but that plot idea was the one thing I took out of it.
And of course, I've made a critical error here in not talking about the story that is in the novel because I know it. So then I forgot to tell other people.
I've actually done interviews where they're wanting to get the story out of me, and I've gone, around the globe, and they're going, no, just tell us what happens.
So funeral catering is the device, and The Wakes does refer to wakes as in after a funeral, but it's really a device to show us the entirety of humanity, I think. I mean, there is such grace in this story, such sadness, humor, compassion, tenderness, and tension when needed. So it is a fantastic device. And I remember when I first heard about it thinking, oh, that's just brilliant. And it's so brilliant, actually, that it has been optioned for film. So in thinking about your story being changed potentially for a script, because obviously every novel needs to have some things come out of it. Are you interested in that writing process, or are you thinking I will just stay away from that?
Well, my initial feeling, I did a really long interview with the producers, which I loved, and my initial reaction in that interview was, I want to step away from it. I'd had I've got a 2-book deal. I have to writing another novel, and novel writing, I adore it. So that's what I wanted to do, and I thought script writing is a whole new creative avenue that I have no experience in that. But that said, so I said no, I'm happy for them to put their expertise into it. But that said, they said it'll either be a TV series or a television series or a movie, most likely a television series. And if it's a television series, they'll need more content. So so I will, if it makes it from option stage to actually being produced, then I may get a chance to do a little bit more with my characters. So
I can certainly see how there would be more stories there, right?
Oh yes, people have already been asking me, what happens with this, and like they seem to not want to let go of the characters. So,
yeah, I
had a neighbour drive past and call out the window, but what happened with so and so?
I completely understand that feedback about wanting more from the characters, because I felt exactly the same way.
Yes.
So that's exciting news, and
yes, very exciting. I'm thrilled. I'm a movie lover, so I'm absolutely thrilled.
Yeah, and the progress on novel number 2. Are you well into it? Is it?
Yeah,
done?
I'm quite well into early days with the actual writing, but the concepts, the ideas, the beginning, the ending is sort of there. Yeah, it's all in my head. If I could go off to some obscure place where I had no other responsibilities in life, I would be running 24/7, because it's all there.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I often think that running a household is the enemy of creative work.
Exactly. And a puppy is the enemy. Anyway.
Yes, puppies in particular. Yes, they need a lot of attention. But to talk more broadly about your writing and you as a creator, what or who inspires you or has inspired you as a writer?
I would have to say, on a root level, Agatha Christie. I addicted to Agatha Christie books when I was a teenager, and I read everything a couple of times. And even though I don't write, her actual writing probably isn't an inspiration. The idea of a mystery, the page-turning aspect, I just love. I don't read much crime myself, but I do love that page-turning element of a mystery. So that's always going to be in anything I write. That sort of. So I think that's my first inspiration. My huge inspiration is female writers from the classics. I think that's for language and character and gentleness, almost, gentleness with which they treated characters. So Middlemarch, George Eliot, Middlemarch, Virginia Woolf. Virginia Woolf, I always go back to for language, the way she describes things, the way she, her sentence construction, Wuthering Heights. So it's quite a few that are sort of mentioned in my novel are great loves of mine. And more contemporary ones are Marilyn Robinson. She's a US author. It's her use of language and mood. So yeah, I do love some male writers, but it's predominantly female, and I think maybe it's an emotional thing.
Well, it makes sense. You are a female writer, so
yes, that's right.
Do you have a favorite Agatha Christie?
Oh gosh, I don't think I can name a favorite now. It's been not so long. Oh, and then there was one maybe.
Right. And there are a few to choose from. That's the other thing.
Yes, there are quite a few to choose from. I just had this beautiful feeling when I remember picking up one of her books and just being immersed in the mystery. Yeah.
So when you have an idea for a story, I mean, the wakes, obviously you picked the kernel of the catering, the funeral catering out of that first manuscript of yours, but say with the second novel or your third manuscript, but the second novel contracted that you're writing now, you said that story is sort of sitting there ready to go. But when you first have the idea for it, are you someone who just carries it around in your head? Do you make notes? Do you have any kind of structured process at that point, or is it all just simmering, waiting to happen?
I would love to say there was structure. My dream is to be more structured. My husband's a sort of a management consultant. He's always saying, now, have you got a plan? But no, I don't. I carry it around completely in my head. I live it. I remove myself from life a little bit. I'm having conversations in my head. It's in the shower. My most productive time is about 3 a.m.
Okay.
You know, some of the stuff I'm really having trouble with, I've solved at 3 a.m. It's obviously in my subconscious, and I wake up with, there were some pivotal pages in the wakes where I woke up with it fully formed almost at 3 a.m. And I was saying to myself a couple of times to remember it, thinking, oh, I won't be able to do it again this perfectly. But then got up knowing that I just couldn't lose it. These were fully formed sentences. So that's an important time for me. My dream is to be a 5:30 person. When I said that in a book launch recently, and my husband was in the audience, and Emily said, are we talking PM or AM? I'm not really that person, but that's definitely the most creative time, is in the morning, without a doubt. So my idea is to walk my puppy early, have my coffee, get some sun in my eyes, look at some trees, come back and write for as long as I can until life sort of interrupts and pulls me out of my study. So I think for me, that's the best time.
So it sounds like when you had the problem solving at 3 a.m, it was waking up at 3 a.m. as opposed to getting up or staying up until that time. So is that really?
That's right. Yes, I'm asleep,
Yeah.
and it's there, it's quite a few times. But it's also part of the fact that it never leaves my head. So
I'm also wondering what happens in your dreams that you.
I'm a big dreamer. Oh, I dream a lot. I have dreams where I wake up thinking, oh, if only I could remember that. That's a spy thriller, you know, the sort of espionage sort of stuff I dream. And yeah, I'm a big dreamer.
Yeah.
So, and I love, as you might be able to tell from the wakes, I love conversations, and a lot of those are I'm having conversations with my characters in my head quite a bit. I think my friends that have read the novel, I don't know what they think now, you know, that who I am, that this is what's in my head. But anyway.
Well, you saying that you would wake up with sentences and need to record them does make sense to me as well, because there are several moments in this novel, and I'm not going to say what they are because people should go and read it so they can experience it for themselves, but there are so many sentences where I just stopped and thought, that is perfection. And so now I'm wondering if these were some of the sentences that you woke up and thought, I need to write that immediately.
Quite possibly. Though I am a person, I can't remember the author, but I remember reading about an author who said I could work on a sentence for a week, and that's me. Like I have a real love for rhythm, which will probably come out now. So my parents were both music lovers. My mother was a singer. She was a soprano, and she was a beautiful voice, and she would be I grew up in the country, and my father was a forester, and she would be the lead in the country towns, Oklahoma or Carousel. You know, we'd sit in the front row just in awe of her, and she looked like a young Elizabeth Taylor. And my father was an opera buff, and I learned piano to for a long time. So I love the rhythm of a sentence. So I will, if a sentence doesn't sound right to me, I will have it in my head for a long time until I get it exactly right. If it's a comma or a word, and even if I'm working on a paragraph and I'm working on it for too long, and I think there's a reason I'm working on this too long, I'm oversaying this, and I might refine that paragraph down to one sentence. So my book, the writing's been called Deceptively Simple. It's, you know, it's very readable. People seem to say they read it too fast, and I think that's the rhythm. I think I almost sort of want to pick you up at the beginning and just take you along in this rhythm. So it took a lot longer to write than people might think, in the sense that when I would read it, I'm a chronic self-editor. I keep going backwards, and I'll be in some place and then suddenly something will come to me and I'll go back again. And if I read something and the rhythm, if I feel jolted, so it's not to say the rhythm's the same, you know, obviously there's a short sentence, a long, you know, if I feel a jolt, I think, oh, well, why have I stopped?
Okay.
and I'll look at why I've stopped and have a little fiddle.
And I think that is a great tip, actually, because so often writers can not feel like they're readers of their own work, but that instinct about when something's not working, when there's a block there, is real. And it can be to do with punctuation or just to do with the sentiment expressed in the sentence. But I'm also a big believer in rhythm. In fact, I will quite often look at what I'm writing and think, needs another beat, or the beat is wrong, or whatever it is, and I can just feel it. It's not, and maybe it is because I too have a musical background and that's where it comes from, just that sense of the musicality of language and conversation in particular is important.
That's right, and that's part of the pleasure of reading, is, you know, so as you know, my novel's about life and these beautiful things in life, and one of them is just, and so I sort of wanted the reading experience to be a pleasurable thing in itself as well, even though it can be very sad. I just wanted there to be certain joy in the writing itself. I guess that's in the rhythm. There's sort of a beauty in the rhythm is what I kept wanting to. And I'd say to myself, if I wasn't, because I just love writing, and so if I wasn't entertaining myself, not necessarily being funny, but even just being moving, then I would stop because of the sheer joy of writing. And if I wasn't feeling that, then the reader would. So, just
to harken back to something you were saying earlier about, you realize that once you started to make things up, that you're a lot freer. I wonder, in the wakes, in the making up of things, you actually have come very much back to the truth of your experience that you were trying to document in that first manuscript. You know, the emotional truth, really.
Very good question, because that happened a couple of times. I didn't even realize I was doing it. I won't give things away, but there was a character where I gave her some backstory, and I didn't even realize when I was doing it that was largely my not my backstory, but a pivotal thing in my backstory. And I just did it without even thinking. So yes, it's fiction, but you know, it has the truth of my emotions in, like I've put my soul on a plate there with the book. So yeah. It was all very real to me.
Yeah.
And I think having experienced being very close to dying, I came within hours or a day of dying. I'd accepted it. I'd faced it really. And so I felt it was something I could write about with a lot of authenticity. I felt that I just had to write from what was inside me. I did research it, but I didn't really need to. And it's not necessarily everyone's experience. Well, it wouldn't be everyone's experience, but it was mine. And I felt, and it would be other people's. And that's what I wanted to express.
So I wondered, therefore, if I'm moving on to the tips portion now, the conversation, we talked about rhythm, but I'm wondering if writing from emotional truth rather than factual truth is a good tip for an author, particularly one who's starting out.
I think it is. I think that my writing just is freer and more. I think it's got more impact when I write from a more emotional truth. Something I read once that really had an impact on me. It was an interview with LIANE Morriarty, who wrote the Italian series. You know, my brilliant friend. And she writes anonymously, so it was an interview via email, and they asked her, because her books really struck me. When I was reading, I was thinking, this must be autobiographical. This feels so real. But the big thing in writing for her, she said something like, writing must unleash authenticity. And I sort of aspire to that. I think that when you're writing, it's got to feel authentic. It doesn't have to be factually true, but the reader you need to believe first, and the reader needs to believe that it could happen, that it's believable, that it's authentic, which goes to the characters, to the drama you put it to. So, you know, I'll be in the shower or something and think, oh, Chris wouldn't have said that. It'll just come to me, something I've written, he wouldn't have said that, you know. So it goes all the way down to that so the reader isn't reading something and they're suddenly jolted by the fact that would that happen? You know, when you read a book and you think, oh. So I think that's the number one thing for me, and so it's not so and that's probably one of the challenges for a fiction writer as opposed to a non-fiction writer, is you are making things up, but they have to be authentic.
Yeah.
To really,
sorry, go on. No.
Oh, just to have emotional impact, to connect, I think. Yeah.
I'm quite a believer in actually trusting the feeling in the body when you know something's not
right.
Given a character something, you think, oh, I should make them say that, and then there's this kind of feeling. And
yes, that's so true. Yes, yeah, and that's probably, and that's where it is. You have to spend the time with, particularly if it's a dialogue thing, making that real, and not fiddling with it just so it's entertaining and funny or whatever.
So in the time before you start writing, talking about this manuscript that you're working on now, do you spend a lot of time? You said you talk to your characters. Do you actually spend a bit of time just trying to understand who they are before you begin writing, or do you think that you find out who they are through the writing, or both?
Both, really, but it's interesting because I'm right in the process now of working on the characters, and I think that probably is the most important thing for me in the beginning. My novels are character driven, and I have to get a real feel for who they are. But I think that they develop as you write. You find parts of their character, but I need to start with a real sense of who they are, and that's much more important to me than working out the details of the plot. I think that the middle of the story is what changes a lot. The amount of backstory you might bring in, or the way that what the characters actually do. But I always sort of have a good idea of beginning and end. But with the characters, when I finished writing the Wakes, they became so incredibly real to me, like friends that when I finished the final proofread, because I had a lot of trouble letting go, and I kept hanging on to them and little bits of conversation, and I genuinely said goodbye to them just because I knew I wouldn't be putting words in their mouths anymore. But they were so very real to me.
It is hard to let go of them, and maybe we never do, but
probably never do.
But yeah. I do think it does feel like saying goodbye, yes, to people you know very well. But then, of course, you have to acquaint yourself with these new characters.
Yes, and I've got a new character at the moment, and she's sort of very new to me, and I've got a bit of an idea, but I think she's going to grow as the novel, and we're lucky we can then go back and make and once we know them a bit better, go back and maybe change things that they've said or done in line with that character.
So it seems to me that as a writer, you have learned very much from reading all these great classics that you talked about. As you said, you didn't do a course. I think a lot of published writers don't do any sorts of courses. But I'm wondering if there is any writing advice that was given to you before you were starting out, or just advice you've seen or heard that you think is particularly useful.
Yeah, well, I don't actually know. I do now, but I didn't know any writers at the time. And so I wasn't given any writing advice. I did read a sentence that did stick with me, which was, you can't, well, I don't know, it applies to lots of things in life, but you can't turn an ocean liner around that isn't moving. And in terms of writing, so you might get up and think, I don't feel at all creative, but if you don't start, you're never going to move forward. And so that was a great bit of advice, to just sit down and write, and then you might warm up to it, or at least you've got something on the page that you can go back the next day. And it may not look great, but you can work on it so it is great. So I think that was something that really resonated with me. You can write things and think, oh, that's no good at all, and then it becomes something, a real gem. Another bit of writing advice is that it's killing your darlings. Through the editing process, and just with my sister, who knew with that first book what was real and what wasn't, I've learnt not to shoehorn something into a story just because it's an amazingly funny thing or an interesting thing. And I can tell when a book's doing that now, I think. So I have things in my book that have happened, but they have come to me as I'm writing. I haven't thought, that's such a funny story, where can I put that in my book? That has to be told to other people. That's just so good. I was doing that in the first book that's in the drawer, and I've learned not to do that at all. And even with a scene, if I'm fiddling with it a lot, I'll think to myself, I might love what I've written, but I'll think, that shouldn't even be here. I'm having to work too hard on it. So it can't be right. Yeah.
It is hard to be ruthless, though. It probably gets better
yes,
time.
it is.
It's hard.
Really hard, really hard. My grandmother was a philosophy tutor at Melbourne University, and someone wrote a book about the impact she had on him, and the advice was she gave to him, what's left out can be more important than what's in there.
Right.
And I think that's a really good bit of advice too.
So I'm now developing a clear sense of your lineage, actually, not just Agatha Christie, but we have philosophy, two generations. We have your mother, the musical performer, your parents both love music. I can see this lineage coming through in your actually, because part of what's beautiful about the Wakes is that it's not at all heavy-handed or overworked about life and death, particularly about death and the nature of human existence leading up to death. It's all very subtly woven in, and that's very much to do with your craft as a writer. But I also get the impression that the things you learnt from your forebears, parents, grandmother, no doubt other grandparents as well, are sort of in your marrow in a way that means they can come out in the writing without you having to make them obvious.
That's very true. That's very true. I think, and I really thought about that a lot when I've had to write my bio for, this is all very new to me, with the writing and everything, and I look back on my childhood and realized how lucky I was. We grew up in the country. My father being a forester, we went to the bush a lot, and the true bush where there were no toilets or anything. So, and that's just deep inside me, is this love of nature from that. My father just absolutely loved the bush, and then he came from a very literary family. It was his mother who was. I think she was the first philosophy lecturer in Australia, female philosophy lecturer in Australia. So I didn't ever meet her. She died before I was born, but quite an amazing woman. And my father loved books. So our house was filled with good books. And my mother was very funny. So there was that humour storytelling thing from my mother, and the singing, and we were it was very difficult. My mother died when I was 17 in my final year of school. So that was incredibly traumatic. I think that's something that was inside me that I needed, obviously came out in my writing, coping with that, dealing with that. But I did have a very fortunate childhood, and I had a lot of music and literature influences there. But there's also a really strong sense of, my parents gave me a strong sense of what it is to love life, without a doubt. They were both people that just took things in life and really enjoyed them, and my brothers and sisters were all the same, and we all just loved storytelling and music and funny things, and we got that from our childhood, as hard as it was at one point.
Yeah, well, I think all of that is clear in the Wakes, because even though it is about funerals, wakes, death, it is so much about life. And you mentioned you mentioned your mother being a musical performer, and music being a big part of your background, your childhood rather. So I'm going to ask you, do you have a favorite musical artist or a favorite song or album that you'd like to tell us about?
Well, it's going to sound really dark, but I'm a huge Elvis Presley fan. It's just been with me since I was young. I'm one of those people. So there is, I heard Richard Glover talking about on the radio, because he's an Elvis Presley tragic as well. And there's just something in his voice that just connects with me on such a deep level. So he's my favourite. In terms of, I don't think I could name a favourite song. I love so much music, and not a particular genre, not a particular artist. It's just if a song does something for me. And sometimes I use it as inspiration before I start writing, and particularly a song that's performed with lots of building emotion. So, like, I love Eddie Redmayne from Les Mis doing Empty Chairs. You know that?
Yeah.
You know, that song, it just almost moves me to tears every time. And I feel really inspired to go write something moving and almost uplifting in a sad way. And songs like that. So I can't write with music. As soon as I turn it on, it's just too distracting. I could write in a cafe with people talking around me, but I can't write with music on. But I often play something before I start writing.
Right.
So Yeah.
I
Does that
completely
answer your question? I took a rave on and I can't even remember what you've
Oh, you
asked.
absolutely answered it. I can't write with music on either because my brain will go to the music. And
Exactly.
even classical,
you can't focus enough. That's yeah.
Well, Dianne, I think you've given us a great sense of the very rich tapestry of your life and work, and to go on again about the wakes. But I hope anyone who's listening to this reads it because I do love it so much.
Thank you.
It was wonderful to talk to you and to find out more about your writing. And I look forward to book number 2.
Thank you so much, Sophie. It's been a pleasure.